Did you know that there was 2 major sexual revolutions that happened in the world? Most of us know the recent one, and we're going to cover some of that, but it was the one before that that I wanted to highlight that completely transformed, revolutionized everything. And it was brought to my attention by our friends over at Live Action. But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan, and this channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. On this channel, we drop podcast clips and topics that are a little too spicy for the main channel. So if you're new here or if you're not new here, please make sure you're subscribed here too, as we're edging on 250,000 subscribers, and huge majority of you guys that watch this channel, unfortunately, are not subscribed. All right, let's jump into the video. Shout out to the homegirl, Lila Rose.
When we talk today about the sexual revolution, we usually refer to the radical change in sexual values that took place in the West in the 20th century. But this was not the first sexual revolution, and it wasn't even the most radical. In fact, another, far more massive sexual revolution occurred nearly 2,000 years earlier, when Christianity took root in the 1st century AD and prompted a complete overhaul of the sexual ethics of the dominant superpower of the day, the Roman Empire.
I always think it's interesting when there is a counterfeit revolution that is about hedonism and self-actualization versus the authentic God-driven ambition, well, God-driven revolution that we see in what she's about to describe. So it's always interesting to me that Satan kind of just tries to take stuff out of God's playbook.
Totally.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the Roman Empire, what was sexually permissible and what was taboo were almost entirely based on your social status. If you were a higher status free man, you could have sex with almost anyone you wanted, as long as the other person was not also of high social status or was seen to be the property of someone of high social status.
That's crazy.
That's insane. That's an insane paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the kind of stuff that was frequent. And so based on this worldview, what she says next is really interesting, because she's going to go on to say that a Harvey Weinstein and that type of exploitation was not out of the norm in ancient Rome.
The property of someone of high social status.
In the Roman world, Harvey Weinstein would have been completely unremarkable. The idea that a rich, high-status man should have access to his social inferiors, in particular his slaves, was completely unquestioned in the era before Christianity.
Whoa. That's dark.
Sex with other men, women, boys, and girls was in most cases socially acceptable for these elite men, as long as the high status man was considered the active partner and not the passive partner.
Next time you—
Whoa, sus.
You know what that means?
So she was saying with men and women, and then we don't even get into the file stuff there, but as long as they're the active partner, that's
that means
dark.
That means ain't no power bottoms in this scenario.
Wow, they had class even in they had hierarchy.
you want a boy, buy one at the market.
There were many victims of the Romans' cultural sexual hierarchy. Slaves often fared the worst, especially children. For a Roman upper-class man, there was no concept of the sexual abuse of a slave. Slaves were merely property to be used and abused at will. A slave boy or girl was viewed much the same way that many might view pornography today, as a convenient outlet to quickly act on sexual lust. The Roman Empire—
Yuck!
Yeah, the Roman Empire was tripping.
This is a sickness of the highest order.
Empire built an enormous slave system, and slave ownership impacted nearly every element of Roman society, including using slaves' bodies as sexual playthings for their brutal masters. The mechanics of Roman sexuality were shaped by the presence of unfree bodies across the social spectrum, writes the historian Kyle Harper. The ubiquity of slaves meant pervasive sexual availability. Slaves were subjected to untrammeled sexual abuse. Today, we understand consent to be an important standard by which we determine whether a sexual act is ethical or not. But for the myriad of slaves who served as objects for the sexual acts of their freeborn owners, the concept of consent was totally unheard of.
It's owed, and the girl is all yours.
Largely because of the widespread availability of slaves, pederasty, like pedophilia, or sex between men and young boys, was also common in Rome. Since
darkness.
She got a new word for it? Pettish?
I don't know.
It's like gay pedophile stuff?
Probably. You want to pull it back?
No,
you're really interested in this word.
I'm good.
this was based on social status, slave boys served as objects for their master's brutal lust, cast aside when they grew their first beard to be replaced by a younger boy. And while freeborn elite men had broad sexual license, the of free women was highly controlled under Roman rule. Women were nearly always under a man's power, whether he be her father or husband. And in many circumstances, she couldn't object if her husband chose to kill their child because it was malformed or an unwanted girl. If a father caught his daughter in the act of adultery, he was allowed to kill his daughter and her lover. Into this sexually...
And to be fair, yes, this is still prevalent in certain parts of the country today. Certain Islamic countries have certain degrees on this, right? And so this is the sort of stuff that was, when we talk about Jesus completely revolutionizing the world, this is an aspect of it. Critics like Bart Ehrman will say things like, Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet. He was saying the end of the world was coming. What I think what people miss is the apocalypse that was coming was a revolution in areas like this, that it was transformative of society as a whole because of what that actually did and how that actually moved the needle in this incredible new direction with ethics. Like New Testament ethics are completely counterintuitive to everything that was happening in the Roman Empire.
Entered Christianity. Imagine being a Roman slave or a low-status woman and hearing the teaching that all human beings, male and female, are made in the image of God.
Right.
Or the Apostle Paul's words in Galatians for the first time. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Instead of basing ethics on social status, power, and dominance, Christian teaching based ethics on the equal value of every human being. And it upheld freely chosen, one woman, one man, monogamous marriage as the only acceptable context for any sexual activity. Marriage is the covenant that unites a man and a woman to one another and to any children that may proceed from their union. Instead of forced marriage, Christianity required that each spouse freely choose the union. Instead of tolerating infidelity in marriage, Christianity required that each spouse be faithful, the man equally so as the woman. Instead of seeing people of lower classes, women or children as property, Christianity required that they be treated as persons with the same dignity as anyone else. Any sexual act outside of the marriage bed was forbidden. And for those who married, Christian spouses, husbands and wives were taught that their bodies belonged to one another as gifts, the husband's body to the wife and vice versa. Everyone, male or female, high status or slave, was called to live by the same sexual morality. This was a radical teaching that required a dramatic transformation in the treatment of children, lower class men and women. To Christians.
And this is why if you read the book of 1 Corinthians, you see so much sexual immorality and how pervasive it was in that culture, right? Because this is what was common in the Roman Empire was very counter to what we see being taught in the scriptures.
Slaves, children, prostitutes, women, they all had the same moral standing as freeborn or noble men. Abortion and infanticide were also forbidden by Christians. The way that archaeologists today find an ancient brothel is that they look for hundreds of newborn baby bones buried in the ground. These are bones specifically of male infants because the female infants would be raised to be prostitutes themselves. While it was customary among the Romans to abandon unwanted infants to die on trash heaps, Christians would baptize and adopt these babies. Everyone, regardless of their status, had the same individual responsibility and dignity. Is it any surprise that so many of the first converts to Christianity were slaves and women? Many societies...
Interesting, right? Well, most people don't know that, like, the paradigm for our views on not terminating pregnancies, not deleting babies, are downstream effects of how Christians viewed women. The early church viewed women. The early church viewed babies that were born. The early church viewed the most discarded in society. That's why we're pro-life. Like, we're not pro-life because, oh, you want to control women's bodies. No. Christians have been stepping in and taking babies that the Romans discarded. This has been happening for literally thousands of years, right? Building the shelters, building the homes that take these in, right? And so that's the part I think people just don't understand how different society was pre-Christianity. Go ahead.
Past have required women to abstain from sex until marriage, but Christianity demanded this of men as well. Many societies demanded women to only have sex with their spouse. Christianity required this of men as well.
That's right.
Gradually, laws and norms began to change as Christianity spread like wildfire throughout the Roman Empire. The first Christian emperor, Constantine, ended the Roman system of unilateral divorce in AD 331 and permitted divorce under only a few serious circumstances. If a man divorced his wife without grave reason for doing so, he had to return her dowry and could not remarry. By the 4th century, the Roman law recognized that slaves could be manumitted or emancipated in a church ritual performed by a priest or bishop. The Christian Emperor Valentinian I banned infanticide in AD 374.
Why did that take so long? Like infanticide wasn't banned until 50 years afterwards? Like that's crazy. So these are things that are changing the world. They had a very low view of children. They had a very low view of sex, right? Does this sound familiar? Right? Does this sound familiar? Like it's the Roman Empire all over again, right?
Who had joined the church must be treated as equals, and that it would be better if people kept no slaves at all. Chrysostom encouraged slave owners to educate their slaves in a trade and then to free them. In AD 428, the Christian Emperor Theodosius II banned the use of coercion in the sex industry. The law was intended to protect slaves and women from being forced into prostitution. Far from imposing an oppressive patriarchy, Christian sexual ethics elevated virtually everyone in society. The value of slaves, women, and children were no longer based on their social status, but on their status as children of God. And freely chosen, faithful marriage, not social status, became the measure for morality. Monogamy eliminated all other forms of license, especially protecting vulnerable children, women, and slaves from the lusts of powerful men. The legacy of Christianity lies in the dissolution of an ancient system where status and social reproduction scripted the terms of sexual morality, Harper writes. The transition from a late classical to a Christian sexual morality marked a paradigm shift, a quantum leap to a new foundational logic of ethics in which the cosmos replaced the city as the framework of morality. Christian sexual ethics eventually became the norm in the Western world. This was a gradual process as jurisprudence and cultural expectations developed over the course of the next 2,000 years. But for close to 2 millennia, there was a near universal understanding in the Western world that an enduring marriage between a man and a woman was the bedrock of civilization. Ethical values centered on the idea that sexual activity belongs within the bond of marriage between a man and a woman who were open to children. Today, with the modern sexual revolution well underway, we've been breaking down this system of sexual ethics that has been the standard for the past 2,000 years. A combination of toxic ideologies, including Marxism, second-wave feminism, and hedonistic post-relativism, has rejected these ethics in the name of equality for women, or liberation, or dismantling the patriarchy, but it doesn't make good on its promises. The reality is the sexual revolution of the 20th century hasn't led us to a brighter future. Instead, our modern sexual revolution has destroyed the lives and the happiness of millions of people. Can the same ethics that revolutionized Roman society, proclaiming the dignity of every man, woman, and child, regardless of social status, and elevating the value of fidelity and sacrificial love, be the antidote to today's chaos and misery? Let's find out.
Come on. Shout out to Live Action. So, I mean, go subscribe to them. We'll make sure we'll tag them. I think the question is, again, as the world is going further and further downhill, as these things are unraveling, what's going to happen is the people that are going to have the most stable marriages, the most stable families, the most stable finances are going to be the people that do it God's way. And so if you are that, first and foremost, if you want to be that, you first got to dispel and destroy all the dysfunction in your life. You got to start there. Like you got to put to death the foolishness that perhaps maybe some of the programming you have, maybe some of the addictions you've picked up. You have to kill that stuff. And then 2, you got to replace that stuff with something. As you're killing it, you got to replace with something. And then 3, I would say, after you're walking these things out, after you're walking out Christian sex ethic, after you're walking out, hey, like we got a family and we love the Lord and God's blessing us and things are good. And here's the other side of all this. You then have to be vocal about it and stop being scary about it. Stop this whole like, well, it doesn't matter if, the common law marriage versus real marriage. It doesn't matter if the father's in a home. No. The reason why our situation is stable and we're healthy is because of the way God laid it out, and we just happen to be fortunate enough to be obedient to God's ways, right? And that it's not oppressive to be obedient to God's ways. And I feel like if we walk the talk and talk the walk, that's when you're going to start seeing changes happen, because people will look and just be like, oh yeah, like Christians just kind of do it better. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Comment down below and let me know what you think. And be sure to check out this video that YouTube is recommending just for you. Let me know if they nailed it. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.